off to a good start. Good morning and welcome to our January 15th, 2019 work session. Today we have a Tampa Bay water update from Matt Jordan, who is the general manager. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate the invitation to be here to give you an update on Tampa Bay water. And just to tell you, we also have several members of our executive team here today. We have also a representative from our general counsel's office here in attendance today. And I did want to give you a brief overview or just an update on Tampa Bay water to start us off. Over the past 20 years, and we just celebrated last year our 20th anniversary, and we started off by investing over $1 billion worth of capital contributed by the member governments and district money and also some state grants, federal money to build and interconnect the system that you see on this graphic today. We did acquire your assets, all the assets pretty much of the member governments, and interconnected those over the first 20 years. We were given three objectives as we started off: to cut back on groundwater pumping and to diversify the region's water supply. When we took over in 1998, we were 100% groundwater. We also were charged with providing a uniform rate that was the same for all member governments. We were charged with being the sole and exclusive provider of water to the member governments, with limited exceptions. Most notably was the exception of the city of Tampa kept their surface water treatment plant, and they also maintained their water use permit on the Hillsborough River. And this slide here that has the two pie charts shows where we were in 98 and where we were in 2018 on the various water supplies, where we have surface water, groundwater, and desalinated seawater as we have continued to build the system. One of the essential requirements of our interlocal agreement, and if you're familiar with the interlocal agreement, that is some of our founding governing documents that basically charge us with doing certain things and delivering things to the member governments. One of those very important things is to always plan for the future. We do that through our long-term master water planning process. The board just approved the latest update. We're required to, the board is asked to approve or update that plan every 5 years, which just happened last month. And the plan focuses or looks at a number of things. It looks at the regional water demands. We have to track when your needs are because of our unequivocal obligation to provide you water. So we have to obviously track those. It takes us, probably 10 years to build a new water supply, so we have to start well in advance of your needs. That's a big part of the master planning process. We also look at how can we optimize our existing facilities. We're always looking for how we can squeeze a little more capacity out of what we already have, and we have some opportunities to do just that, and we are pursuing those. We also look at how we can save water. It's conservation. If our demands slow or they don't increase as quickly, then that saves us all money. So we are working on how we can work with member governments to conserve water. We look at future regulatory requirements and how those may affect the system and our operations. We look at water quality opportunities and challenges, and just to mention on that particular topic, we have been in a conversation with the member government staff and our board looking at our water quality parameters. We do meet and exceed all, and we always meet all the state and federal standards for the clean water requirements. We have additional requirements as part of the interlocal agreement called Exhibit D, where we have to meet some additional parameters, and one of those is total organic carbons. And without getting down into the weeds, it's one of those things that could affect the life of the water in your system. So the member governments have asked us to look at that in cooperation with them, trying to find a balance between how much water you have to flush and how much expense it takes us to produce the water we give you. So those are very productive and ongoing discussions, and we're still working through that process. And certainly, we're also looking at potential new water supplies. The board did approve some ways to criteria to help us in our decision-making process. As we evaluate each of the projects, we look at the environmental stewardship, we look at the project cost, certainly, and we look at reliability or resiliency, if you will, because we have to meet the requirements of whatever projects or whatever capacity we're relying on has to be a robust system. The board did shortlist several projects. There were 3 that were narrowed down at the December board meeting. New groundwater supply was one of those. That is working, trying to work with Hillsborough County on their SHARP project, where they're going to be, they're planning to continue injecting water, treated wastewater into the aquifer, to the saltwater aquifer, creating credits that we would in turn hopefully be able to acquire those credits working with them. It does require a MOU or an agreement with Hillsborough County because we don't have reclaimed water, we don't have wastewater. They do, member governments do. So this project certainly relies on our ability to be able to negotiate an agreement. We've been in discussions with the county for probably about the last year, and we're hoping to get an MOU to the board hopefully soon, perhaps maybe in next month in February is the objective. But that's one project we're looking at. We're also looking at expanding surface water treatment plant and using existing surface water sources, and also looking at expanding the our desal facility that we have on Tampa Bay. In addition to that, our master plan says we need more capacity for the system by 2028. And obviously that's a target that we're working to meet. We have a more pressing need in South Hillsborough County. We are projecting that we're going to need more water in that location, that part of the region by 2025. In other words, 3 years earlier than our overall demand. So we have a couple options to be able to meet that need. We have the capacity, we just don't have it where we actually need it to give them supplies. So we're looking at the option of building a pipeline, a new pipeline to deliver existing capacity down to South Central Hillsborough County. And we're also looking at, as we were looking at the SHARP project, as part of our master planning process, we said let's look at that one as well to see if that could not only bring the capacity where we need it, it could also provide additional capacity that would push out the need to build something else in 2028. It would push it out several years probably. We're just looking at those 2 parts of the process. So moving forward, the next steps, we will be doing additional feasibility. We'll be using the board's criteria to evaluate these projects. We'll be looking at design and other aspects of these, and then we will be coming back to the board with recommendations. We do need to make a decision by February 2020 on the pipeline or SHARP. We'll see how that plays out working with all the different requirements of that project, but we do have some time to continue to evaluate that. But as we talk, the way we talk about this in Tampa Bay Water, we're not in the maybe business when it comes to providing member governments water. We're going to get you water business. So we've got to keep 2 options open, not knowing we can do one. We know we can do the pipeline, and we're hopeful that we can work out something with the SHARP project, but time will tell. I want to talk a little bit about the Tampa augmentation project. I know there's some folks here from the city of Tampa. Running parallel to the long-term master water planning process, the city of Tampa introduced its own water supply project, the Tampa augmentation project. This project will allow the city of Tampa to supply its own drinking water through the use of highly treated wastewater that will be injected into the aquifer and then withdrawn and put into the Hillsborough River near the city's intake. The TAP, or Tap Augmentation Project, or TAP as it's referred to, could provide some regional benefits. Most notably is if that could change our demands. We're planning for demands that the city will need in the future, and if they meet their own demands, then obviously that would lower the demands that we would have to meet. So that could push out the need for an additional or a project. And there's other benefits as part of an agreement that we're looking at with the city, and we're still working with them and the board. And I'll outline some more of those in just a minute.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
may I ask a question at this point? Or are you
Do you want to
waiting?
wait till is it?
It's about this right here. I don't know how you prefer.
I'm amenable to whatever you want to do.
So, obviously, there's a lot of us that have been following this issue as it's been moving along. And my question is, does this, part of what's made Tampa Bay Water so successful, in my opinion, is the fact that everybody came together on an agreement. The fact that Tampa wants to now create their own little thing going forward, does that set a precedent for other members of Tampa Bay Water to maybe start down the same path?
Well, that's probably, more of a legal question that I may ask our legal counsel to address. And I can have them come up now. We can follow up at the end, however you prefer.
Whatever the chair, however the chair wishes to proceed.
Why don't we finish going through the presentation and then we'll ask that question after.
Oh, good, because that'll make me write it down so I don't forget.
Thank you. However, it is important to understand that the benefits that we're looking at in association with the TAP project cannot truly be determined until the feasibility studies, pilot testing, and permitting for the project takes place over the next several years. And so, as part of the agreement, there's a time frame set forth in that agreement to give the city the opportunity to continue to evaluate the project before they ultimately make the commitment to move forward. Just to kind of go through the process of where we are today and how we got here, back in October of 2017, our board convened a member government reclaim committee, we call it, to look at reclaimed water and possibilities therefore to maybe report back to the board. At the end of July, the committee met and agreed that legal counsel from the member governments should explore whether the agreement could be drafted in a way that would allow the TAP project to move forward consistent with the interlocal agreement. In September 2018, a draft agreement, a memorandum of understanding, was presented to the board's executive committee. Then following that, it was presented to the October board at the October board meeting, where the agreement, memorandum of understanding, was discussed, tabled, left pending. In December, our board held a workshop to discuss the project some more and the agreement some more. And at the end of that process, they came away with a series of questions and seeking additional information, and it was given to the member government attorneys to work together to come back with a recommendation, or at least to provide the information requested. There is a meeting of the board's executive committee 28th of this month, and they're going to be talking about that and policy. It's what the expectation is, and then we will also be discussing the agreement at the board meeting in February 18th. The points that were being discussed at the workshop are you see the 6 that are listed here. The Tampa Bay. There's a discussion that there could be 20 million gallons of water made available through the Harney Canal through this project's implementation. And the board want to talk about how much of that's guaranteed and is it guaranteed, and they want to know more about the 20 million gallons. They wanted to talk about or get information on the city's right to sell the water within Tampa Bay Water to member governments or outside the region. The city of Tampa's right to sell credits potentially created by reducing nitrogen or nutrients being put into the bay, the amount of debt service owed that Tampa Bay Water currently holds, and what each member government's fair share of that existing debt is, and the amount of co-funding available for the city versus other regional projects. And the last one was also discussing perhaps adding some opt-out provisions into the agreement. As I said, legal counsel will continue to discuss this, and the board will be discussing it on the 28th of this month, and again, I would imagine in the February 18th board meeting, and be looking forward to getting reports and additional information. I know the attorneys have been meeting and or at least having calls and discussing these items, and then we're looking forward to this coming back and answering the board's questions, providing the board the information they need as they contemplate this agreement. So with that, Madam Chair, that is my presentation, and I will be, along with our staff, happy to address any questions you may have.
Okay. At this point, do you want Mr. Khan to come up or Mr. Dunbar?
Which,
Or
the
both?
question was about precedent. Okay.
Good morning. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Good morning.
Donald Kahn. I represent Tampa Bay Water. My partner, Barry Buenaventura, is general counsel, and I assist her with that representation. She had a family emergency and could not be here this morning. With regard to the precedent issue, this was a very important issue that was faced by Tampa Bay Water and the member government attorneys. The role of the general counsel at Tampa Bay Water, with the assistance of Peter Dunbar, special counsel, was to facilitate discussion among the member government attorneys. All of the member government attorneys participated in discussions about this issue, and one of the legal issues being precedent. Obviously, we wanted to avoid anything that would go and conflict with the interlocal agreement. Any agreement that was reached has to be consistent with the interlocal agreement. Secondly, we wanted to avoid, if at all possible, an approach which would require legislative attention. This was important to try to resolve and come up with an agreement within the interlocal agreement that could be determined here locally by the member governments. The approach that's been taken would set the precedent of resolving matters within the interlocal agreement. Not in conflict, but within the interlocal agreement. The way in which that is done is that there are certain exclusivity exemptions that Tampa has. Tampa is in a unique position within the interlocal agreement. They have certain provisions that allow them to do certain things that other member governments cannot do. And there's a history behind that as to why, when the interlocal agreement was entered into, those exceptions to exclusivity were allowed. But that is the starting point. No other member government has that same exclusivity exemption. But having said that, we still have to be mindful of, are we setting a precedent that other member governments could rely upon? As I've already said, it has to be within the context of the interlocal agreement. There has been negotiated a draft of an MOU between all of the member government attorneys that has not been approved by the Tampa Bay Water Board. But the approach being taken, which we feel, the member government attorneys and Tampa Bay Water's general counsel feels is consistent with the interlocal agreement, is that certain rights that Tampa Bay Water has in certain of the facilities that Tampa would rely upon to implement TAP, specifically the reclaimed wells, the wells that would inject the reclaimed water into the ground. Tampa Bay Water has an interest in those because as the regional supplier, Tampa Bay Water has an interest in the facilities that supply water. The approach is to assign Tampa Bay Water's rights to those facilities to Tampa for an agreed upon consideration. In the draft agreement, it's $7 million. The reclaimed wells that are going to be developed by Tampa, but in which Tampa Bay Water would have an interest, Tampa Bay Water's interest would be assigned to the member governments, to Tampa. Tampa would develop TAP. Tampa would develop TAP and would use those wells to implement TAP. Under the MOU, Tampa Bay Water would retain a right to option and exercise an option to reclaim its rights in those wells and would have to reimburse Tampa for the $7 million. The point being that the precedent that is set, if there is a precedent, in my judgment, is unique to Tampa in that they have certain rights under the interlocal agreement that no one else does. But to the extent that another member government had a right that could be assigned to Tampa Bay Water and allow that member government to proceed with its own project. We don't know what that might be, but if another member government had rights that could be assigned to Tampa Bay Water, perhaps this could serve as a precedent for that. But right now, we see it as a very limited agreement premised on the unique position of Tampa and also premised on the ability to operate within the interlocal agreement by Tampa Bay Water assigning its rights to Tampa under an agreement for compensation and Tampa proceeding to develop its reclaim project. And one final thing on the precedent issue. Tampa Bay Water does not have a role in reclaimed water. That's the member governments. So again, when it comes to precedent, we're dealing with a source of water here that Tampa Bay Water is not, does not have a direct interest in. That's the member governments. So with all of that being said, while some may argue that it is a precedent, I believe it is a precedent of working within the interlocal agreement to resolve an issue. And one final thing. What the charge was to the member government attorneys and to Tampa Bay Water's general counsel was to try to resolve the technical drafting issues without getting into the policy issues. There are remaining policy issues that the Tampa Bay Water Board must discuss and would have to resolve before any MOU could be finalized. So we have worked through, the first issue was, could this be done within the interlocal agreement? And I've explained how I believe it can, and I believe the member government attorneys believe it can. But there are other policy issues that are yet to be determined before the MOU can be fully finalized.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. I have a follow-up, Madam Chair, if I may. So, like everything else in life, it's constantly changing and evolving. And just because Tampa Bay Water today doesn't have an interest in this new source of water, what's to say that going on down the line they wouldn't have an interest, number one? And number two, is there one sheet of paper that lists all the pros of going forward with this and all of the cons? I'm just curious.
With regard to the first question, the fact that the member governments retain rights in reclaimed water is in the interlocal agreement. The interlocal agreement would have to be changed for Tampa Bay Water to have rights in reclaimed water. That was very important to the member governments back in 1998, that they retain their rights to reclaim water. So that's the first question. With regard to the second question, I'm sure there is a pro and con description that can be prepared, if it's not already prepared. And
Here he comes.
Mr. Dunbar has one.
I should have guessed. So are we going to be able to get a copy of that?
Of course, of
Thank you.
course. Well, these are the benefits of the project.
Well, yeah, thank you. Nice to see you, Mr.
You want to
Dunn.
go ahead and put it on the seal?
Right on the seal.
Right on the
there.
seal.
I would like to see that and have a chance to absorb it, but the other piece of, the other side of that is, like with everything else, wherever there are benefits, there's also negatives, and I'd like to know a little bit about what they are. Do you already know?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, even some of these, there are some questions specifically about some of these benefits, so that we've talked about extensively. So all the benefits that are purported to be there aren't completely there. So those are some of the conversations that we've been having.
This is good info. I mean, it's interesting.
If I could, Mr. Dunbar has been directly involved from the beginning, as you know, with Tampa Bay water issues, and has really been the facilitator among the member government discussions on this issue. And if it would be okay with the chair, I'd like to invite Mr. Dunbar to come on up.
Morning.
Good morning.
Madam Chair. Good morning. The list that appears that I brought and will leave is what's been identified as the potential benefits. As Commissioner Eggers points out, the team of government lawyers was tasked to address a number of these, and that's what Mr. Jordan went through on what the 20 MGD, by example, actually means. There's also, from individual commissioners, the questions of the debt service and what might remain, what is to be paid, things of that nature. So what you see here, we've been meeting since the December meeting of Tampa Bay Water among the member government lawyers. Mr. Morrissey from your staff has been a part of that. We met earlier this week and are scheduled to meet again later this week as we resolve and attempt to answer the questions that were posed by the members of the commission at that time.
Madam Chair, may I? Well, I haven't served on Tampa Bay Water, so I'm just maybe asking questions we already know the answers to, but does Tampa currently have debt to Tampa Bay Water?
Currently, the debt of Tampa Bay Water, and Christina, if I misstate something, you might correct me, but if you let me look at my notes, I think current indebtedness is 1.285 billion.
Billion?
Billion.
Let me write that down. Would you repeat it, please? 1.2.
This is part of what we're preparing for our board members to look at the 28th. But the current indebtedness is 1.285 billion
That's a total.
total.
Okay, so then
So the
I have one more.
Well,
It's
the
not
second part of
Tampa's.
your question is, does Tampa deal with that? And the
Yeah.
debt is retired based upon the usage of water, whether it's Pinellas or Newport Richey
Correct.
or the city of Tampa. And currently, historically, I believe the percentage that of the indebtedness that has been retired, because the indebtedness was much higher at one point, is about 2.19%. That's their contribution to the debt retirement based upon the usage of water that they make.
And so do you know if they plan to sell the water to other non-member governments?
Well, their member government attorney is in the audience and present. It's my understanding that they do not intend to do any other marketing of that water other than what the interlocal agreement provides. And by example, Pinellas County is the wholesale member of that, but then to the jurisdictions within its geographical boundaries, it is permitted by the interlocal agreement to sell the water.
To non-member governments?
Sure, because by example, the city of Clearwater would not be
Yeah.
a member government, and Tampa has, all of the member governments have that privilege.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Welch?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Long asked most of my questions, and I wanted that simple list as well. So thank you for asking that. You mentioned Tampa's historical debt percentage. What was that?
It's 2.19%. Just
And you're
over
looking to
2%.
compensate for that if they move forward with this reclaimed water because their usage will go down?
Well, Commissioner, that's one of the questions that the member government lawyers have been asked to provide more specifics. I'm reading from my notes because that was one of my homework assignments for our meeting later this week. Tampa, as Mr. Khan explained, is unique among the member governments because they had the self-supply from the Hillsborough River from the outset. Tampa Bay Water has a commitment to provide backup water when their source is insufficient. And so historically, I believe that Tampa Bay Water budgets for them 6 million gallons a day. Not always used, but that's the factor that we use, and that's the basis when they acquire that water that the 2.19% comes from.
And that's the number 3 on your chart there, the 6 MGD?
Yes.
Okay. Always good to see the Tampa Bay Water staff. I think it's been one of the great successes regionally for our community, and y'all do a fantastic job. Dr. Adams, was it, is retired? Yes. So who's the new data guru, science guru? Mr. Hurd. Okay, good to see you. Just a quick observation on your, and this is one of my pet peeves, so don't take it personally. I say this all the time. But your interlocal on your website should be searchable and highlightable. Right now it's just scanned as an image, so I can't search it. So that might be something that you want to change so folks can search it. I was searching for reclaimed water there in section 309, and y'all have kind of covered that, but Tampa's request is in compliance with the interlocal. Is that correct?
Did you say is or is not?
IS is.
The objective that we were tasked among the member government lawyers was to make sure that this project, if undertaken, would be done consistent with the terms of the interlocal agreement. That was the precedent that we were looking to accomplish.
Okay.
Once you're able to see how that can be done, which is what the MOU is designed to provide, and then the subset questions, once they're answered, as Commissioner Eggers pointed out, leaves our board and your 2 members of our board with the ability to say this is good public policy or it's not good public policy, let's do it or let's don't do it. And I think that's the objective we're working towards for the February meeting.
Okay. And I haven't been in the trenches on this in a while, so I certainly defer to Commissioner Eggers and Commissioner Gerard, and they've done a lot of work on it. When I read the first sentence, it says, member governments shall retain the exclusive right to develop, own, and or operate all facilities for reclaimed water. What else am I missing? Because that seems to be pretty straightforward.
Mr. Khan touched on this briefly, and there are 2 other member government lawyers in the audience, and if they disagree with my analysis of what we think we see here, here's the uniqueness of the project TAP. The reclaimed water belongs to the member governments, whether it's St. Pete, whether it's Pinellas, or the other members, including Tampa. Then the project proposes to have that treated, I think, twice and inserted into the aquifer, and then to take out from the aquifer potable water and put it in the reservoir for the city of Tampa. It's the withdrawal of the water that changes, in my opinion, the character of that resource and brings it back within the jurisdiction of Tampa Bay Water.
Okay.
And those rights are what Mr. Khan described as being assigned for consideration in the context. And then you look to the benefit list that we have tentatively identified as the consideration for that.
Okay. And in terms of risks on the other side of the ledger, one of the issues has been as other folks go out and create their own water resources, you've got that pool of fixed costs that everyone that is still in there is left to cover. So is there a risk that those folks, the member governments that remain, have any increased costs in the future because of Tampa's project?
I'm not sure that I can answer that, Commissioner, directly yet. That's one of the questions that we're trying to address to bring back to the Executive Committee on the 28th of this month. The infrastructure that exists in place today and the bonded indebtedness that was created to accomplish that objective is designed to provide the mandate in the interlocal agreement that we must provide the water when it is needed. And currently, that mandate includes the need and the requirement to provide to Tampa. So the infrastructure in place and the indebtedness that was incurred to accomplish that mission, all of the member governments benefit from.
Okay.
And as I mentioned earlier, the repayment of that is done based upon the amount of usage that the member governments make of the resource.
And your aim is, if Tampa moves forward, to have a compensation for that debt piece?
In my opinion, the agreement draft already provides for a $7 million payment, I believe. And I think the questions that came up at our last board meeting was, can you put that in a better context, and do we know that that is sufficient based upon whatever considerations the individual commissioners are interested in looking at? One of the issues that we're working on for the 28th.
Okay, thank you.
But I see one of the benefits, though, is the number 3, that 6 million gallons a day. That's the backup currently, correct?
Yes, and one of the considerations in this process, Commissioner, is that Tampa will affirmatively, or does in this MOU and agreement, affirmatively give that back so that that budget and planning and expense does not have to be incurred by the other member governments.
So just to clarify your answer to Commissioner Welch's question, so the water would be pumped back up from the reclaimed wells and put into the Tampa Reservoir or the
Yes.
Bill Young Reservoir?
No, the
Tampa.
Tampa
Okay,
Reservoir. One of the benefits that you'll look there, there's a special permit for the Harney Canal that is in Tampa Bay Water's name currently, but it is exclusively for the benefit of the city of Tampa. That's one of the things that's being released. And to the extent there is water, the 20 MGD or some lesser amount of that, that is available to move to the Young Reservoir. But the reference that I made in my answer to Commissioner Welch is not to the Young Reservoir. The project scope provides that the only users, ultimate users of this water from the TAP project will be the city of Tampa and its customers.
And I want to ask a technical question at some point, but yes, go ahead.
My question now is technical a bit too, if you don't mind.
Ken, I think you're on, my man.
Yep, come on up.
Is this the science guru person?
Yes, and you are?
Hopefully I can fulfill that expectation.
Well, I hope so, because this is an important issue we're talking about, the source of life, for goodness sakes. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself first, so we feel comfortable that you really are.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Well-
sorry, I've never met him before.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, Madam Chair. My name is Ken Hurd. I'm Chief Science and Technical Officer of Tampa Bay Water. I've got 32 years of experience in water supply development. I have a Master's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Kentucky. Hopefully it doesn't offend any Gator fans here, but I'm a
Here we go.
professional engineer here in Florida. I've served on the Water Science and Technology Board of the National Research Council of the National Academy of Science for 5 years, primarily due to my experience in working on the Tampa Bay Seawater Desalination Facility. My master's was in water resources and rainfall estimation using weather radar images. So my entire background has been working for many years at Tampa Bay Water. I did serve 6 years at the Southwest Florida Water Management District, where I was the Water Resources Bureau Chief there, mainly managing cooperative funding projects, flood protection, water supply, reclaimed water projects. So I do have an extensive background in water resources and specifically focused on water supply development and utility management.
So my question is scientific, and it is about science, which I believe in clearly. And my question is there really science-based evidence that shows that putting this wastewater into our aquifer really cleans the water to the point where it is drinkable, potable water?
Well, that's a very good question. And it's a question that we are trying to, or the city of Tampa is in the process of trying to answer that question. As you may know, there are a lot of regulatory challenges, technology challenges, and how you would go about doing this project and what is permittable. You know, there's a couple things that you have to think about with this. One, there's the water quality side. Is okay, what kind of treatment are you going to experience from the aquifer once it's pumped in? Because what they're proposing to do is pump it into a lower aquifer and then withdraw it out of an upper aquifer that's above that. There's a separation between the two, and that you would theoretically achieve some kind of treatment from that water passing through the aquifer. Well, there's uncertainty with that, and I can't sit here today and say, yes, that's absolutely going to provide that level of treatment. That's why there's a lot of pilot testing, modeling that has to be done to evaluate that, and a very stringent regulatory process that would have to, that the city would have to go through in order to obtain the permits in order that would allow them to build this project. They will have to demonstrate that they would not, that this water would actually achieve that level of treatment that would be required. They would also have to demonstrate that the project is going to create the yield that they expect. I mean, how much water will they be able to pump out compared to what they're pumping in? So that's a big unknown at this point that the city is still working through to try to address that. And until they go through the permitting process, really there won't be assurances, and even with that, there's going to be an operating period that you would go through to make sure, yeah, is it performing as you expected it would at a full scale? Those are all questions that we can't answer today. So I'm just trying to tell you.
I clearly hear you, but I'm a, you know, pretty basic, down-to-earth individual, and I'm also a mother and a grandmother. And so, to me, this is what I heard you say, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I heard you say, no, we don't know right now if this is science-based evidence that everything's going to be just peachy, there's no threat to public health and safety. Then my follow-up is, why on earth are we talking about this now at the level that we are, which when we get our reports from our person, Commissioner Eggers and Commissioner Gerard, it sounds like it's pretty imminent that this decision needs to, or that they want this decision to be made. And I'm thinking, just from a common sense perspective, that we're not ready to make that decision today. Is that wrong?
No, I think it's a very good observation. I mean,
Oh, okay.
Mr. Jordan referred to you a time schedule that we're working on for the region. We need new water supply by 2028. So what we've established is that by 2023, we're going to need to know what project do we need to build in order to meet that demand in 2028. So there are things that have to be done between now and then. Mr. Jordan mentioned that we're going through feasibility analysis, additional studies on these water supply options. So we're looking at the surface water treatment expansion as one option. The SHARP project is an alternative. Desal expansion, and then monitoring the TAP project. So the way this is working out is that additional studies and feasibility are continuing to occur, and by the end of 2022-23, that's when we need to know, by that point, is this a feasible project? What assurances do we have that this project is going to move forward? So the board, the Tampa Bay Water Board, will be in a position then to be able to make a decision. Do we proceed with a project? Is the TAP project going to proceed? What I'm trying to say is that there's going to be a lot more information available to us at the point that that decision needs to be made, that we just don't have that information today. to tell you this is the best project to proceed with. Until these additional studies are done, we're just not going to have that level of assurance to provide that information.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I put you in the hot seat,
Oh, that's
but
okay.
not really.
So my technical question is, currently wastewater is treated to a certain level and discharged into the bay and into other places, as well as Pinellas County does deep well injection. So isn't that already kind of traveling and then being used
Well,
for
and-
drinking water?
In those cases, you're injecting into what's considered a non-potable or non-drinking water source because of the salinity is generally higher. So you don't have to meet as strict injection water quality requirements when you're injecting into a saltier water body. In the case of the TAP project, they're going to be injecting into what's called a underground source of drinking water, possibly because of the salinity level is at the level it is. It's not beyond what's called 10,000 parts per million. So they will have to meet higher standards because they would be injecting into what's considered a potential drinking water source.
And that was what I was going after. So they would have to highly treat this almost to the point of it being possibly ready to drink. My second question is this being done anywhere else currently?
Well, I mean, the exact project, see, that's what's tricky because, yeah, it's being done in other parts of the country, like in California, they have a project, the Water Factory project, where they inject reclaimed water and withdraw it. But you have to understand that the aquifers are different in all these different, so you have to look at each of these projects on a site-by-site, case-by-case basis to understand all of the geology, the hydraulics that go on under the ground, how the water moves, the type of aquifer, the rock that's down there. So all those are things that you have to look at on a case-by-case basis, which is why pilot testing and building wells and test wells and all of that is really important to be able to provide a greater assurance that you're going to be able to meet those drinking water standards.
Any other questions?
I have a
Justice.
non-tap question whenever we get done with tap.
Okay. Any other technical questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Well, what I was hoping, maybe somebody from Tampa Bay Water could, just as part of our conversation, just talk about SwiftMud's role in all of this, in the MOU, and the parts of the MOU which include the SHARP project and the regional demands for water that are beyond our borders of control. So that would be one. And then the second question would be the potential. Again, I don't want to phrase in a negative way, but the downside of moving forward with an MOU to Tampa Bay Water and its member governments. I just want to touch on that after you've talked a little bit about SwiftMud's role. And if you don't touch on some of the areas, I might ask you additional questions on SwiftMud.
Yes, Commissioner, I understand. Let me give you this overview. From the outset of the dialogue, which now would be about 16 months, Brian Armstrong has been overseeing it. In the early stages, we actually had periodic meetings at SwiftMud about this and TAP and where it fits in the regional plan. So they are very current on their knowledge about this. I talked to Mr. Armstrong last week just to bring him up to date and then get some additional information for the benefit of, because I know you are aware of this, Commissioner Eggers, but one of the questions we're trying to resolve for the other members is if you apply for co-funding from the Water Management District, and this is a very large project, is there sufficient revenue available for other projects? And the answer to Mr. Armstrong's answer to me was yes, which confirms the testimony that he gave at our last board meeting. That includes projects outside the geographical region of Tampa Bay water, so it would extend into Polk County, into the SWACA and areas like that. Commissioner, that's,
Okay, well, the only other thing is, as you start to look through these benefits, I think there are places where Swift Mud touches us, and it specifically as it relates to Sharp and how much credit we're gonna get from the water that we're putting into the ground. And again, I just wanted the separation of, there's deep well injection, but on the Sharp project, it's really gonna be used as a kind of a barrier for saltwater intrusion down by by our saltwater, our desal plant. And in exchange, far, far away, we would get credits to take the water up out of the ground, additional water up out of the ground. That's different than the TAP project, which would, in that case, it sits right over top of the reclaim that you put in the water they take from the top. So it's just a little bit different, but as it relates to the regional credit that we're gonna get for that water, there was some talk about SwiftMud perhaps taking some of those credits to be used elsewhere, potentially. And I just wanted, if you could just touch on how we interact with other water districts in that area.
The executive director of the Water Management District approached actually the board and several other regional areas, including the Polk County Regional Supply Authority that is in an administrative dispute with, I think, Peace River Regional Water Management District. The idea was, could you step back from a formal dispute long enough to see if there are credits within the area, and I think that might include us, but other than the one formal presentation, that seems to have taken a back seat. Now, I thought Commissioner Long's questions were interesting because of the time frame that we're dealing with here. Part of what the MOU was supposed to, or is designed to accomplish, is to make sure that as you go through this analysis that, and it happens at many levels. It's not just the science, it's also the permitting availability that you would have from the Water Management District, because particularly with regard to the Harney Canal 2040 permit, that has got to be resolved to the satisfaction of Tampa Bay Water, or you don't get the benefits no matter what that quantity might be. And the same is true with Sharp, because there is now discussions to see if we can't reach an MOU with Hillsborough County, who is our partner, projected partner in that one, so that we know what the parameters of that would be to accomplish the objectives you described. And finally, I might mention, just because you had brought it up and we are working on this as well, one of the things, Commissioner Long, that in this cycle was, as Mr. Hurd explained, there's a time certain when we have to know whether the analysis, which relates financial, it's permitting, it's scientific, whether the objectives can be accomplished, or if not, there would be an opt-out to return to a different course, and that would be in the deadlines that Mr. Hurd described. So that's one of the issues that we are working on, to be more specific.
Yeah, and the time frame, I think one of the comments was, what's the rush? And so the idea is that Tampa is looking for an MOU so that they can move forward. I would suspect they're going to move forward regardless of whether we assign an MOU agreement. But what does this specifically allow them to do that they can't already do as it relates to Swift Mud? And then, so how is that going to affect us?
Here's my understanding of that, and I'm going to turn around after I answer it and see if I either get a nod, yes or no. But I believe that there is a request for cooperative funding on feasibility that is currently pending at SwiftMud. The viability of whether or not that is going to be funded, as the request is, depends on whether this is considered regional or simply isolated to the city of Tampa. The goal here would be to show that at least at this stage we are considering it regional, and it would make the likelihood of the first phase of funding to begin the analysis is considered potentially regional. That's not a yes or a no. It's close.
It's close, and the projected cost of that project that they're talking about building is a couple $100 million?
350 million.
350 million, and the cost of this feasibility project is?
3 million.
3 million. So,
3 million.
I guess back to the issue of why this is so important, it's to help them with the $3 million cost.
Yes.
part of it. Now I'm getting an absolute no. See, they said a minute ago that it was partially that, so now I'm getting an absolute no. So,
Please come up and thank you for being here. Please identify yourself.
My name is Jan McLean. I'm an Assistant City Attorney with the City of Tampa. Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman and Commissioners. The feasibility is in front of, we've already applied for feasibility cooperative funding with the Water Management District, and they have agreed to co-fund the feasibility analysis. The Water Management District has policies in place that if you are a member of a regional water supply authority, you must go through the Regional Water Supply Authority and either have their approval or seek their cooperation in receiving any additional funds for the construction of a water supply development project. We will be at soon that point at which we will have to apply for those types of funds beyond feasibility. So what the agreement will allow us to do is have that approval from the Tampa Bay Water Authority when we apply for the additional funds from the Water Management District. That will put us in compliance with their policies. So they are funding us through the feasibility phase, but not beyond without the approval.
so the question, I guess, is from a timing standpoint, that's what I was trying to drive at. So the feasibility is ongoing, or you've already applied and gotten approval for that?
For a portion of it, yes.
Okay, so in addition to that, if we become a regional ask, so to speak, then the additional cost would be shared,
Between the city
you and
the district.
and the district. But when are you talking about actually applying for the construction dollars?
So the Water Management District's schedule for applications for cooperative funding is a year in advance of the fiscal year of which you would seek the funds. For instance, we're in, and this is the math part, so we're in the fiscal year 19. If we wanted to apply for money for fiscal year 20 to begin next year, we would go through the application process now. So they are very aware of us working with Tampa Bay Water, and as Mr. Dunbar has indicated, the executive director has appeared in front of the authority at least a couple of times, acknowledging that they know that we're trying to work on this agreement in order to be in compliance with their policies so that we could apply for funding.
Yeah, I think, and I guess that was the only question I had on this particular point, and that was that since there is no, I mean, again, my understanding from Tampa Bay Water folks is that this feasibility process is going to be taking some years, not just another couple of months. So maybe I'm wrong, so maybe that needs to be clarified.
We should complete, if I may ask, this is where we step aside in our team, but we should complete feasibility, I believe, within the next fiscal year. And I'm inviting, with your permission, the director of our water department up who can complete that answer to
Thank you.
that question.
Good morning, Chuck Weber.
Good morning.
Yes, we've already finished most of feasibility. There's some feasibility left to do. The project has been determined to be feasible. We know we can do it. Now, the rest of feasibility is looking at, well, what processes do we need to put in place and how much exactly is that going to cost and where exactly do we need to put the facilities? So we're moving from can we do this to we know we can do this, now how exactly do we want to do it? So we've started design processes as well. We've missed out on funding for the 30% design already. We applied for that, and I believe that was around $3 million. So we've missed out on that opportunity already. And we've also applied for 60% design funding for next year. And if we don't get to a regional ask soon, we'll miss out on the 60% design funding as well.
So to that point, we in the last meeting that we had, we were very specific about, and some of the members were very specific about having an opt-out provision at any point along the way to pull the support of Tampa Bay Water from this MOU as things were progressing. So how does the district going to commit dollars for a project if we can opt out along the way? I guess what I'm getting at is why is there such an emphasis on timing and putting and pressuring things, when I feel like if the pressure was just released a little bit, people could take a little bit more deliberate, measured approach to this analysis instead of feeling like they're being pushed into a corner, when perhaps they're not, but the feeling is that. So if we can pull out so easily, and that was some of the conversation, and probably some of the attorneys can get into that more about how easily that will actually occur. Because, I mean, when you look at these benefits, there was enough questions here. There's as many questions as there were answers for these benefits. And so some of that process, we were still investigating. We're still taking our time trying to go through this and make sure we're comfortable. Forgetting the precedent issues, forgetting the SWIFT-MUD relationships, forgetting the ability to get money for future projects. I mean, I've talked to folks that are involved at Tampa Bay Water previously who are no longer, who have a lot of concerns about this for many, many reasons that have been shared here as benefits. So I just think taking our time to do this is really important. And so that's why I was just trying to get a better understanding about why this is so critical in timing. And you just said it's to get money for design, significant money for design costs, but we can pull it at any time we don't feel comfortable. So how are they going to lend on that basis? So that's my question.
Well, I'm not sure exactly, we haven't worked out the specifics of the opt-out clause, but when it comes to SWIFT-MUD funding, unless I'm mistaken, if you don't achieve the benefit that your project is supposed to achieve, then I believe you have to repay some of the money. So I think that's how that would end up being backed out, for sure.
Okay.
But as far as the specifics of why we need it and when we're moving forward, we've moved into the design phase, and the reason we're pushing and moving forward with the project is to make use of the water that's going into the bay right now. We have a need, certainly during drought right now, to use the water. The original interlocal agreement allows for Tampa to get more water out of the Hillsborough River, so this seemed like a good match for all those things. If you would indulge me, I'd like to correct something I heard earlier about the safety of reclaimed water, if I may have just 3 minutes.
Just a second, and then I really want to get to Commissioner Justice.
Yeah, we're fine, we're fine.
I don't know the answer to this question, but along the Hillsborough River, are there any septic tanks that go into the river currently?
Well, I can't say that I've ever seen one, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't.
Okay. Do you have any of your wastewater plants that go into the Hillsborough River? They're affluent?
No. Our wastewater plant is at the end of the river out in the bay.
Into the bay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I may speak to kind of the line you're talking about, I come from our regional water authority in Kansas, and we treated 225 million gallons a day. That was our capacity. And we had a river water supply, and there was wastewater treatment plants upstream, and we had to basically treat river water that had treated wastewater in it. So it's not very different, and it happens all over the country. It's not very different at all. It's something that happens every day. The important thing is to make sure you have a treatment process in place to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And the way you deal with that consistently, depending on, because I think Mr. Hurd explained that geologies are different and situations are different. But the one thing that shouldn't be different when you're evaluating it is the risk. And you can look at what the risk is of microbial contamination and chemical contamination. And the treatment processes that are used in water treatment very well document the amount of risk reduction you get with each treatment process. And that's the approach that the Potable Reuse Commission is taking with their framework. I serve on the Potable Reuse Commission. I have for the last year or so. And we're about to finish the framework that kind of really addresses the safety of reclaimed water within Florida. But beyond that, it is something that's being done in California, and Texas, and Arizona, all over the country. And there is national resources that you can go and look at for the National Potable Reuse Association and look at all the information they have on how risk is assessed and addressed. So the processes, to answer the question, is there scientific evidence? Most definitely, yes. And when it comes to this specific project, when you look at the constituents in the water coming out of the Howard F. Kerman Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant, in many respects, the water is a higher purity than what's in the Hillsborough River and we're treating already. In particular, total organic carbon is one of the main parameters that we have to treat in the Hillsborough River. And the total organic carbon in the Hillsborough River is much higher than what comes out of the Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant. And there's many other constituents that we've looked at. So, you know, I've treated water for over 25 years. I have a master's degree in environmental engineering. I ran advanced surface water plants using lime softening and membranes. And I can tell you for a fact that I would much rather treat the water coming out of the advanced wastewater treatment plant than what's in the Hillsborough River. Not that what's in the Hillsborough River isn't treatable if you have the right treatment processes. At the David L. Tippin water treatment plant, that's our only water treatment plant, we use advanced processes like ozone and microfiltration. And those processes have been shown to reduce significantly the risk for microbials and emerging contaminants of concern. There are pilot projects in Altamont Spring that recently won a national or international award. I think they went to Japan to get it. But one of the things that they showed was that those processes of ozone and microbial biofiltration, are very successful in reducing those kinds of risks. I'm sorry, I get excited about water quality, so I could go on forever. I'll stop.
So the feasibility study that is currently funded, when will that feasibility study be completed? You may have said that, but I just...
Well, we've completed the first phase. The second phase we're hoping to complete by the end of this year.
End of this year?
Yes.
2019? Okay. Okay. We're going to find out who Commissioner Justice wishes to ask a question. I think it might be Mr. Jordan, but thank you very much. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had it was on slide 3, I think, early on in the discussion about the change in the source of supply of water in those 20 years and the increase to 35% using surface water. And I was trying to figure, the surface water collection, is that simply the reservoir or and just tell me a little bit more background on that.
Well, the surface water, we rely on the Hillsborough River, the Bypass Canal and the Alafaya River. When those rivers they also use those water sources to fill the reservoir. So the reservoir is our savings account, if you will, for water when we have a dry period. So we try to keep the reservoir full when surface water is plentiful, and then use the reservoir when the surface water is not. So those are the two river sources that we use for both going directly to our surface water treatment plant and to fill the Bill Young Reservoir.
So that's surface water, that's treated surface water coming through.
The surface water we store is raw water, and then we send it to our surface water treatment plant either directly from the reservoir or directly from the rivers to be treated at the surface water plant and then put into our distribution system.
So it's I guess just trying to understand the increase in 35% in those 20 years is, I think, a pretty substantial number. So I was just trying to understand where that source was coming from on the collection of the surface water.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Long?
Yes, so I just have a comment and then maybe a question that you could find out the answer. So my understanding is that the City of Clearwater's project has been quite delayed, and the reason for that is because of the high cost and technological challenges that they have been facing. I'd be curious about what those are and how that might play into the Tampa issue as well. And then my last, it's a statement really, not really so much a question, but my understanding is that the project that has been referenced by our scientist in California, that they don't have the limestone base that we have here, the topography in our area. So I think that's quite not a fair, comparison.
Well, just to suffice it to say that that's precisely why you do feasibility, pilot testing, and permitting to answer those questions. If you had answers to those questions, that wouldn't necessarily be required. So that's why they're going through this. And yes, geology is different in different locations, And as Florida looks to get more involved in reclaimed and how they utilize that, I mean, there's a lot of things member governments can do with reclaimed water. I'm one of your reclaimed water customers. And, but this is an area that does need to be explored. There are some opportunities, but Florida is looking to how do we do it? What are the things we need to look at? And there's, as we said earlier, it's a very different design or concept with Sharp going into the saltwater aquifer, not unlike putting water into the bay. It's very similar to that, but groundwater that is salty, non-drinkable, that will create freshwater credits or groundwater credits miles inland versus injecting it and pulling it out. Again, not to say it can't be done, but those are some of the things that are being developed and worked through. And it's just, that's why, DEP and the others, they want to make sure that they know how this is going to work and what barriers and how many barriers will be needed to ensure, that these will work.
Commissioner Welch.
Thank you. Last question, Madam Chair. So you've got a feasibility study that's already underway and paid for, the city of Tampa does. At what point do you have a cost-benefit analysis that tells you if this would actually be cheaper than other means of building new water resources in the future?
Well, there's, you look at I understand the project cost for the TAP project is around $350 million. We have several projects that we are looking at, some are in the range of $100 million and maybe above. But this is something that the city is looking at doing themselves. We did do an analysis that to the Reclaim Committee that we hired they asked us to hire a financial consultant. We did. They did an analysis, and I believe it showed there was about a $30-some million savings to the region if the city did the TAP project and that we did not have to build anything. But that's a member government building their own supplies versus us. We didn't do a comparison of is our project cheaper than $350 million. We just said, okay, well, if it should be intuitively obvious. If Tampa Bay Water builds it, member governments pay for it. If we don't build it, you don't pay for it. But that's the regional approach that we've been.
Well, maybe I'm not being clear
I'm sorry.
enough. Is there a potential for, if they build this, it reduces your need, Tampa Bay Water's
Yes.
need to build new facilities
Absolutely.
in the future?
If they build the TAP project, and if it works as they're saying that they're projecting that it will work, then that could delay us having to build any new capacity for years. We would still need to get water to South Central Hillsborough County, but it would reduce it would potentially help in two ways. One, it could lower our demands because we're planning, as I talked about in our master planning process, we're required to plan for all member governments' demands. Well, Tampa's demands are scheduled to increase over the next number of years. And so if they build their own supply, then we would not have to build to meet that supply. If they don't use that 6 million gallons that we budget for them, that could be returned and utilized by others. And then there's potential for some of the surface water through some permit changes perhaps that could also add some regional benefit. But again, all of those are dependent upon, and we don't know the answer to all those right now until we do get a little further down the road. But these are all based upon if TAP is implemented and performs as projected, which is right now, I think they're looking at around 100% withdrawal. So we'll just
study you references on your website for us to take a look at? The study that you just referenced, it had
the Ralph Tell's report, is that on our website? We could certainly
Can we get a copy of that?
Yes, sir.
And just going forward, what happens on the 28th at the meeting that Commissioner Eggers referred to?
Well, that is the 28th of January, which is our scheduled executive committee meeting. And the executive committee is going to meet, and all the board members are always invited to any executive committee meeting. Typically, it's just the members, it's the chair, the vice chair, which is Commissioner Merman from Hillsborough County, Commissioner Eggers from Pinellas, and Commissioner Starkey from Pasco are the current members of the executive committee. And there was an invitation to it was noted that there needs to be a policy discussion. And that is one of the things that is going to be discussed, or planning to be discussed, as I understand it, at that particular meeting, committee meeting, and that's.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, Commissioner Eggers and I know Commissioner Gerard, both of you have had to look at these policy issues and try to move this forward. But I think what Mr. Jordan just said in some of his closing comments is very important for us as a board to try to give direction to Commissioner Eggers and Commissioner Gerard. But I think what we're looking at is the regional demand and supply. And if this TAP project finishes its feasibility study and has the ability to basically delay having to put out capital expenditures, that's going to save Pinellas County, what we pay about 42%, or we used to, of the,
About 40.
so I see some benefits of trying to come to some reasonable MOU, and it
Right.
sounds like the term sheets are being worked out, and that I just think looking at this feasibility of being able to do the TAP project is extremely important for other reclaimed water as well. So I support whatever we can do to work cooperatively towards getting to the end.
If
That's
I-
me, but
Yes, ma'am, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree. And that's one of the, we talk about the success of Tampa Bay Water, and you can reference a lot of things and why we're successful. And one of those things is regional cooperation, working together. We believe in that as well. I think it's essential that the board does continue to contemplate this, and our goal is to bring the board all the relevant information that they need to make an informed decision. They've asked some questions that are very germane to this discussion. I think those are the key issues that should be contemplated as they look to develop a policy. You talk about precedent setting, and that goes hand in glove to me with policy setting and how and when and under what circumstances will they look at these things. And so I think, again, that's something for the board to contemplate with the member governments through your representative. So we're looking, our goal the whole time has been to work together and to bring the information that we need, and that is scheduled to continue on the 28th and beyond, and we'll just see where it takes us.
Yeah, question.
Commissioner Peters.
Thank you. My concern has a whole lot more to do with the deep well injections. And I don't have confidence that they are the right thing for us or anybody else to do when it comes to the health and safety of our citizens in this state. And I've got a report right here just from 1973 to 2009 on how many real issues that put the health and safety of our citizens in the state at risk just from those areas. And we know in St. Petersburg recently, they did unprecedented injections. The staff made the decision to inject waste that was not even treated. And when I was doing my banning of fracking bill, when I was doing the research on it, the research says that the deep well injections were a bigger problem to the environment than the actual action of fracking. So that said, since I will be on that board, I would look for something from someone, and I know Swift Mud has done a lot of deep well injections, and there's been objections to what they've done associated with Big Sugar with deep well injections, but my issue comes down to that. Because based on the Fish and Wildlife report, it said that with St. Pete's deep well injections, solids had come up. Highly probable we have solids in the aquifer. And when you have something like that happen, it affects the entire region. And so my issue comes down to all of that. And the governor has now said that he's looking to do a ban on fracking. And if in fact, and it would be worth having the lobbyists take a look at, if in fact he does do a ban on fracking, how expansive does that go? Does that go to deep well injections that's naturally associated with it? And if in fact the governor in his executive order does something that expands out into deep well injections, what does that mean to this project and any other project we have in the future? And I don't know that I'm being a little over dramatic or not, but I think it's worth looking into what the governor has in mind in his executive order, and if it does go as far as deep well injections.
Yes, ma'am, and we do track the legislature and the governor's office and those actions. We monitor that for any number of reasons, and certainly including this. And again, that's one of the reasons that you go through the pilot testing and the feasibility aspects of any type of project like this, particularly if it's unique and is breaking new ground, if you will, to demonstrate that any concern can and will be addressed to see if it is feasible or can it be addressed. So those are some of the things that I would imagine are ongoing as the city continues to work with the regulatory community on trying to move this project forward. And again, we will not know the answers to these questions for some period of time. And whether or not it will yield what it's going to yield, or whether or not we'll get these benefits or not, it's yet to be determined. They're proposed. And again, that's why there's something in the agreement that gives the city some time to be able to determine these things before they make the ultimate commitment to move forward.
So that's just let me put it out there. I hope they address.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Commissioner Peters, welcome to Tampa Bay Water.
Yes, welcome.
Okay, any other comments?
Just a real
Commissioner
brief
Ager? Sorry, Commissioner Welch.
And I'll be brief. I just wanted to ask if that feasibility study will address these issues of safety. Will it address those issues?
In short, yes, it will address the issues.
And who's the regulatory body that oversees all this? Who has the final say?
Well, right now, we're submitting permits to DEP. And just for clarification, this isn't a deep well injection. The wells will go down maybe 800 feet. So it stays within the Florida aquifer, the Avon Park layer, if anybody's familiar with that. So it's not anything that's even remotely related to deep well injection.
Find the science to make me confident.
Will do.
Thank you.
So we're working with DEP on the permits, and we can do this project just meeting the existing regulations that are out there. Because it's not wastewater we're putting into the ground. It is almost drinking water. It's advanced treated, tertiary treated water. It's not, and as I mentioned earlier, in many ways it's more pure than what's in the Hillsborough River. So it is, for all intents and purposes, practically drinking water already. It doesn't have solids in it or anything like that. And we are not relying on the ground at this point to do any treatment. We hope to see what will happen within the aquifer. And as part of this second study that we're doing, we're working with PhD students and a doctor at USF looking at the geology and the microbiology, and we believe they will actually be able to determine by taking some of the cores from the geology and looking at using some of the water from the advanced wastewater plant to see what will happen exactly in the aquifer when that water hits that geology. So we plan on finishing the studies, but all the modeling we've done at this point indicate that the water quality will actually improve.
What's your timing on the feasibility study? When will it be completed?
We expect to have, we've already finished the first phase, which had a lot of modeling in it. It shows that the water quality improves in the aquifer with regards to salinity. We're working on the second phase. We anticipate being finished by the end of the year, or at least have some results that we can share.
Okay. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I just want to concur with your observations. I think we should move forward, but with all the concerns stated on safety, on the financial aspects, I'd like to see those documents as well, and certainly defer to Commissioner Eggers and now Commissioner Peters' Tampa Bay Water to carry, Pinellas's interest moving forward. But the issue of regional water supply really is a key here, and as we saw at Fort Pinellas, we'll be over 1 million folks pretty soon. We are growing again, Pasco's growing, Hillsborough is growing, and water demand is going to be an issue going forward. So I support your comments on that. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Long.
I wasn't going to say anything more, but there's just one comment that really, really troubled me, and I just want to be on the record as saying it's a little scary to me when I hear someone say, we're just waiting to see what will happen in the aquifer. by what we're doing, that's troublesome to me. And I just briefly want to tell you why. You know, the aquifer is a very fragile system that's constantly moving like this, like a shelf. And many years ago, Florida had the Florida Sinkhole Institute. You may remember it. I learned more about the aquifer from those folks when we were experiencing all of the tragedies in North County here with sinkholes back when I worked for the Department of Insurance. And I think it just makes common sense, and maybe this is wrong-headed, when you start pumping things into the aquifer and taking things out of the aquifer, you're disturbing the natural things that are going on down there, and that's worrisome to me. I just wanted to put that out there for Kathleen and David to be cautious when we're talking about messing around with the aquifer, because the whole county is on an aquifer.
That is true. Commissioner Eggers?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just really wanted to thank the board for your thoughts and your deliberation, just not to making a decision today, but just kind of listening through, preparing for today. And Tampa, thank you for coming over and sharing some of your thoughts, and obviously Tampa Bay Water. You know, this is a really important issue. We're not, you know, contrary to what Tampa may think, I'm not trying to be difficult on this issue. This is really important, not only to some of the issues that Commissioner Peters and Commissioner Long talk about, but really about the future of Tampa Bay Water, which has been one of those regional success stories. And we know how difficult it is to create regional success stories. We're trying to do it on other fronts, and we're having our own issues there. So I think it's important that we protect what we have, and so there's a lot of benefits that are stated here. We have a lot of questions on those benefits as to whether they're factual. I don't mean factual, but completely as stated. I'll be interested to hear more about the timing and why it's so critical. I'm sure we'll hear about that. Hear more about the opt-out agreement. I'm all for letting folks do this exploration as long as it doesn't negatively affect us. And at the end. And the only reason I'm willing to do that is because, or vote for that, is because of the purported benefits that it could have to the Tampa Bay region. I mean, ultimately, if there is no Tampa Bay Water benefit, I wouldn't even be looking at this. So because it's there, we're looking at it. But there's a lot of questions here. And I know that we're not worried about precedent, or, you know, you all aren't worried about precedent. I'm worried about it. Because I don't know who's going to be sitting around this room in 10 years or 15 years from now. And so I just want to make sure that we're not opening that up to other folks. And so that interlocal agreement is really an important piece. I'm almost wondering, you know, we gave them the direction to put an MOU together that didn't open up that interlocal or didn't require a vote by each of the members. I'm almost wondering that at some point maybe there should be something that says you need to vote on it anyway, because it is a really critical issue. I mean, I'm more than willing to represent this board in making a decision. I sit on Tampa Bay Water's board, but I represent our interests here, and that's fine. But we've almost gotten to a point that the critical nature of this, that you know, maybe we need to rethink that, and we'll talk more about that as an interlocal vote. The original discussion was, let's not involve the legislature, which we didn't do. City of Tampa did, which really ticked me off. But nonetheless, we got past that, I think. And so now we're here trying to deal with what we have today, and we want to do it right. And so, and if we slow it down just enough to allow each board to say yay or nay, that'd be fine. But we have a lot of work to do. And we'll see how the presentation comes at the end of the month. We'll see how the presentation comes in February, addressing some of the concerns that were raised today, but also some of the concerns that have already been stated. I think it's a good project to be considering, but there's so many questions in my mind. So hopefully we can get there. That's why I asked about the rush. You know, why are we rushing this thing? Because there seems to be more questions than answers. So we shall see, but thank you for your time.
In some ways, I think waiting until the feasibility study is done at the end of 2019 then gives you really an answer at that point.
It gets you closer.
Right.
There's still other things that are gonna be going on for a few years that they can still pull the plug on the project in many ways. The most interesting one is, and I know that, you know, the folks that are, that have looked at this for a long time see that reclaimed water and drinking it one way, but residents see it another way. You know, if you're out in a boat and you don't have any water, sometimes you even think about drinking salt water. So we're not at the point where we need.
Really?
Well, they do think about it when they're desperate. So what I'm saying is we're not desperate for that water right now. The water that they're talking about producing, we're not desperate for it today. So residents thinking about whether they're going to support this, that's their charge with their residents, because we don't want it. I don't want it. I'm not going to vote for it for our water. But that process will be interesting to see as they unfold over the next couple of years too. So the results right now are not favorable to it by residents. So we'll see how that progresses.
Well, you know, we already drink seawater through the desal plants. So it's kind of interesting in that regard.
Yeah, I understand that. Sewer water is a different thing that's been treated, so
Sewers being
I get it.
discharged into our bays, which is getting into the desal plant.
It's slightly diluted, slightly. But yeah.
Oh my
So-
God, we've lost it tonight.
We have one citizen who is asked to comment, and that is David Ballard Geddes Jr.
Of course.
And do we have any other cards? Okay. Come on
Good
up.
afternoon, Commissioners. Quickly, as a sidebar statement, Jack Nicholson made a movie called Chinatown about California and injecting water into the groundwater supply. I thought I'd throw that out there. David Ballard Geddes Jr. I live on Georgia Avenue in Palm Harbor. For thousands of years, mankind has been interjecting his will over God's will. Today, the local politics of Florida are wanting to inject reclaimed water directly into the drinking water supply using temporarily treated effluent, injecting temporarily treated toilet flow directly into the groundwater supply, using invalid logic, injecting reclaimed water nitrates directly into the aquifer, and using it to supply drinking water privileges to the civilian population. Reclaimed water is only temporarily treated with chlorine and fails to rise to the level of being sanitized or sterilized. In fact, so-called highly treated reclaimed water, upon being released into the elements, immediately reverts back to its noxious state, and that introducing a noxious element into one end of our aquifer, quickly bacteria would spread like a petri dish in a science experiment. Overnight, our aquifer, top to bottom, would be completely contaminated with diseases such as typhoid, cholera, and Ebola. Spreading from one end of the aquifer to the other, our water supply would be permanently contaminated. The South Hillsborough Aquifer Recharge Program, SHARP, and the Tampa Augmentation Program, TAP, is the direct injecting of temporarily treated fecal matter, injecting temporarily treated chlorinated fecal nitrates directly into our essential groundwater supply. Why does the logic of our legislation have a problem in the manner in which God uses the soil horizons to naturally percolate, filter, purify, and aerobically replenish our deliberately depleted groundwater supply? Is there a reason for not wanting to establish dry beds, splash beds upon which to allow reclaimed water the room it needs to properly return to the ground as God intended it to be? Is this government imposing its will over God's will in Statute 197.363, evading God's will, hoping to reconstitute their will in Statute 373.715, reconstituting themselves to be gods, claiming to be nature's gods in the Declaration of Independence, prompting themselves with privileges and immunities in the 14th Amendment? Why is this government being unfaithful in its truth in the protection of our elements? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Akers.
Yeah, just a final comment that, please feel free, any of the members here, to contact Tampa Bay Water if you have any questions on any level, whether it's the financial side, because we do have good folks in financial and the obviously our research side as well. And there are folks that have been part of Tampa Bay Water in the past on staff that have strong feelings about this that you can reach out to. And then finally, I was just going to see if Tampa Bay Water had any closing comments or thoughts that they wanted to share, or are you guys, okay, just that was all I had. Thank you.
Commissioner Long?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would just like to do a little survey of my colleagues here because I am receiving an awful lot of phone calls and text messages from our senior population about the shutdown at the federal government. And I'd like to know from our staff, if possible, if we could get a report on the unintended consequences that might be happening in our community. I'm sure you've all read that the airport is opening a food bank for some of its employees who are working but are not getting paid. And just yesterday, I think it was, I started hearing from our elderly citizens about how worried they are about the roof over their head. And I know we've received federal monies for our work for our housing, and I'm a little worried about that, and I don't know if it's appropriate for us to be sending some kind of a notice or a letter to our congressional delegation about the seriousness of this matter. And while we have policy issues here that they're trying to work through, I don't really see that we need to be shutting the government down and causing harm to our citizens. I'd also like to know from Michael Hill if our veterans are being impacted.
Mr.
I
Burton?
mean,
And I noticed that the city of Clearwater had sent out a notice that they were going to try to help, as well as, especially in their utility bill paying, that they were going to offer some assistance. So I assume we are trying to rally around doing some similar efforts.
We are. And so we were preparing kind of a complete report I was going to provide next week to your most pressing issue on the veterans, and that has not been impacted. So that group, there was already an appropriation made, and so in fact, they're continuing to receive benefits and be paid. However, in some of the other areas, we're working both with our airport and potential people that would be impacted, and a variety of other areas where I can provide kind of a complete report next week.
well, I'd appreciate it if you, Madam Chair, if I might, if you could also inquire about our children, because we all know that right now, before any of this happened, we had an enormous amount of school-age children going to school every day being hungry. I mean, if you've ever listened to those conversations from Bob Dillinger about this issue, it's pretty stark.
So
And
I have a kind of a staff summary report they sent to me earlier. However, it's not complete, so I don't want to begin to go down one area and forget three others. But they are working on those. So, for instance, if we have somebody from the Coast Guard that, and what the city of Clearwater did, which is they can't pay their water bill, or something like that. We're looking at those types of issues and bringing forth a package of things to where we can assist them during this time. But again, that's not complete. That's something that staff, it's kind of a work in progress.
well, I think it's pretty important to speed that up as much as we can, just because these issues are happening now, and it won't be long before we're coming to the first of the month again, where all the bills are due, and, people are scared. So, they always come to us as the last resort, because they have no place else to go. So I think it's important to get a heads up on it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, anything further from the board?
Good comment.
Okay, again, thank you, Tampa Bay Water and Attorney Council and technical staff, as well as from the City of Tampa. We're very happy that we had this discussion today, and I think it was good for us to be up to speed. I am going to get a copy of the term sheet, please, and then, is that for us? Okay, I'll distribute it amongst the county commissioners.
Yeah, and then that Raftalis report too, if we could get that, so that would be good for folks to be able to look
Hope
at.
it's searchable. Thank you.
May it send messages that I am always very pleased with our Pinellas County Commission and our regional approach.
Well said.
Okay, we are in abeyance until 12:30, and at that time we will resume our work session.
Here?
No, it's in the conference room. Board clerks?
Congrats, Kathleen.
Okay.
I forgot you
Yeah.
was in Tampa.
Fourth floor.